it's kind of like sixth day, it seems, or fifth day, right? Or which day is this? Fifth or sixth?
The fifth day.
Okay, fifth day. So basically, I kind of like appreciate like everybody's patience, to listen and stuff. And I was looking at the program and everything. It was very rigorous, like 2 sessions a day and things. I'm audible properly?
Yes, sir, you're audible.
Okay, great. So basically, means it's a last day, so I want to keep it like little bit vanilla and more of a, more of informative than burdening with you lot of terms like IP and how you want to protect your product and all that. Means I was going through the program actually, and whatever you have learned or whatever you have not learned actually, whatever we communicated with you because you are kind of faculty like us only. So basically, means on the IP, how to really protect your product, how to really, do ergonomics, how to do different things. Okay, so those things like come like slightly later in the design process. Actually, those things are so we call it in the design process. We call it there are 9 levels actually. So basically, that is called as technology readiness level 1 to 9. So whatever you have heard so far is beyond like technology readiness level of 4 and above actually means once you have everything in ready now um, you want to tell it to the world and then before doing that maybe you want to protect your stuff and all that. But what I'm going to tell you today is some exciting stories actually, not more than that. I'm kind of like in a storyteller role today. And what I will tell you is what it takes to go from like the idea or even not an idea, just like passionate research and from there getting an idea and stuff. So what it takes to go from technology readiness level or so-called TRL1 to TRL3 or TRL4. So basically TRL1 means you just have like idea, like scratch idea. Okay, we want to fly like a bird, or we want to swim like a fish. Okay, so that is the idea, right? So basically anybody can have, like child have like the curiosity, right? Why the sky is blue? That means that is also an idea, right? Or you want to find it out, or we want to make something that looks like a sky, on the earth, and those kind of things. So that is maybe just a thought is an idea, right? If you are, or somebody wants like, okay, I want to get the food via WhatsApp, that is an idea, right? Means it may or may not be possible. Right now you think like it is impossible, that's not possible, getting a food via WhatsApp, right? It's not possible. So that is, you can call it like TRL0 or say even TRL1. And then at TRL3 we call it, you have demonstrated the idea unequivocally in the laboratory. That is kind of like TRL3. And then at TRL4 your idea has been demonstrated in independent laboratory by someone else. You just tell them like this is the product, and this is how it helps. Then somebody else like really takes it and do whatever it wants to do with it, and then come back and say, yeah, whatever you are saying is correct, and we kind of like agree with your findings and stuff. So basically that is typically like TRL4 and stuff, right? So basically I'm going to tell you like maybe my journey over like last 10 years, to go from like say TRL0 to TRL4 actually. Okay, so that is what we will spend like next 90 minutes on. And unfortunately, it just I cannot like really directly talk with you actually. It's just, or else I would have asked you to just interact and stuff. But if you have any question anytime, just put it in the chat box, and the moderator can put it to me and we can take it live actually, no problem. I mean, don't wait till the end, by the time you lose interest and stuff. If you have any curious question or anything, or you can just say like, can you just stop here and can you explain, and then we can go forward. So I'm going to talk about, a new threat in the era of asymmetric warfare towards the design of a blast resistance helmet. So the title looks catchy, and means it looks like, okay, that's good thing and stuff, but it requires like a lot of time and effort and dedication to get to this point actually. Okay, so but before even doing that, what I want to do is, I was looking at the course title actually. So this is faculty development program. So you are kind of like my peers only. So basically on a product and process innovation, concept protection, and commercialization. So the one word that caught my attention is innovation actually. And I thought like, before even talking about my own innovation or my own work actually, let's talk about innovation in general with, with a broader sense, because, that is more important than like talking about about maybe blast resistance element. Okay, so let's take like a detour for a few minutes actually, maybe 10-15 minutes, and we have sufficient time. We are 90 minutes actually, and I do not have like means that much to tell in this thing. So basically we will take a little bit of detour, and let's look at like some of the things that people have done, most innovative people of this century they have done. Let's look at that, and how they went about doing these things, and then let's come back to the actual topic. I hope like that would be fine with everyone. So let's start here actually. So let me do the this thing slideshow. So basically everybody knows this guy or this man, Steve Jobs, right? The great legend of uh, all thing I, right? Like iPods and iPhones and whatnot, right? iPads and all that, right? Or Mac computers and everything. Okay, so everybody knows him actually. Okay, so basically everybody knows him, but very few of you may be knowing the shadow of Steve Jobs actually. And typically, in an interactive session, I ask participants how many of you know this particular person. So if anyone knows, can they just raise the hand? Means if that kind of feature is available. If anyone knows this person, is a cute looking handsome person. Does anybody knows him? Okay, so maybe I will let you know. So this is Jonathan Ive actually. So basically, he was chief technology officer at the Apple until very recently, until 2019, and now he's a chancellor in one of the School of Art actually in London actually. So basically, a little bit of history. So basically, Jonathan he was the brain behind all eyes actually. So basically, you talk about your iPad or iPhone or Mac computer and everything, the brain behind. So basic idea like idea is of Steve Jobs head or mind, but converting these ideas of Steve Jobs into the reality, making them happen actually, the dreams of Steve Jobs into reality is kind of like Jonathan Ive actually. Okay, so basically a little bit of background about Jonathan Ive actually. So basically he did graduate with a bachelor's or master's degree. I do not exactly remember, either bachelor's or master's degree in arts actually. Can you imagine like somebody with a degree in art actually, can he really be brain or the chief technology officer to the most sold product of our generation actually? Can means that is sometimes come as a surprise actually. Did not even have like any formal engineering degree like we do actually. So he has got a degree in arts actually, and then he was just passionate about product design and stuff. And then yeah, he kind of like struggled a lot in his life. Now he is famous, but that is another story. But he started with in his college actually, during his internship and stuff, he kind of like developed this hearing aid design and everything. And then when he started working immediately after graduation, he worked on design of toilets, and over there also he was so innovative that his boss told him like, whatever toilets you are designing are too costly, nobody will buy them actually. Our company do not want to really have a product that is that costly actually. Okay, so he got like kind of like frustrated actually, because he was driven by perfection and innovation and those kind of thing. Okay, so basically that is Jonathan Ive actually. So he kind of like developed these products. So basically there is another interesting story that I would like to share with you about the Jonathan Ive. So basically he kind of like enrolled in Cambridge actually for this thing, for the product design course actually. But after leaving the Walton, I explored the option of studying car design in London, such as the course offered at Royal College of Art. Okay, not Cambridge, Royal College of Art, my apologies. However, he encountered a learning environment that was off-putting. The classes were full of students making boom, boom noises as they drew actually. Instead, he studied industrial design at Northumbria University, from which he graduated with a first-class Bachelor of Arts degree in 1989. Okay, I was 5 years old maybe at that time. So items from his student portfolio, such as hearing aid design, were exhibited at the Design Museum in London. So basically, he kind of like said like nobody's interested in studying, so he changed the school, and then because he was so passionate about design actually. Okay? So think about this. Today, we celebrate Department of Design, we celebrate Design Innovation Center. In 1989, the concept of like artistic design was not there actually. Means there was a huge resistance. People used to say say like designing a car means, engineering a car actually. The concept of aesthetics were also not that developed. Like these days, everything else on all the engineering parameters are all cars or all two-wheelers or all vehicles that you name, they kind of like they kind of like perform more or less the same on all the engineering parameter. And what decides our buying decision is aesthetic and the looks or the comfort and all those things that are really not the part of maybe engineering, but maybe more part of like your artistic ideas and artistic interpretation of designs actually. So basically it was 1989 when this Jonathan Hugh kind of like was interested in these kind of things. Actually, the aesthetic was there. I'm not saying it was not there, but it was very in the rudimentary stage. Very less attention was given even in the during the whole product development cycle and stuff like that. Okay, so according to him, actually, him and both Steve Jobs. So I have taken the quote from both of them. So basically, design is not. I'm just checking on a time. Actually, I just want to be okay. So we are 15 minutes into this. Okay, that's good. So design is not just what it looks like or feels like. Design is how it works actually. So basically, design is function, right? So suppose if you got a car and there are wheels to the car, and if those are not rotating or if they are not taking you from point A and point B, it does not matter if the wheels are made up of diamond. It does not matter because it does not function properly. You will not really use it. Nobody wants to sit into that kind of car. So basically it about like design is all about how it works actually. It's all about function, whether it is able to do the things that it is supposed to do in much more elegant way or much more simple way actually. Then design is all about that actually. Okay, we think when we say like because typically what I do in my second year class actually, I ask like students to define design for me actually. Okay, what is their idea of design? And I get like so many complex definitions actually. But actually, if you look at it in reality, it's not that complex. It's very simple. The idea of design is, it should be able to work. If you want to go from point A to point B, you need a car that is, moving smoothly, running smoothly. If you want to really communicate with your mom or dad or anybody, at a certain distance, and you have a phone and some app in the phone, a video app, then the job of the app is it should be able to really assist that communication. Right now we are on a WebEx, right? So basically it doesn't matter how fancy my WebEx interface is or not, but I should be able to deliver the stuff to you and you should be able to hear it very, very smoothly. Then it is kind of like fine, right? So basically design is all about that actually. Okay. So the next quote from the Steve Jobs, I'm just giving for the broader perspective actually, because some of the contents that I have is much more scientific and based on my work, so that might be a little bit boring, and particularly on the last day of the course. So basically I want to keep it little bit vanilla and little bit enjoyable, so that you can take away something at the end of this, and you can percolate these among your students. So that's the idea actually. Okay, so simple can be, so another quote from the Steve Jobs is, simple can be harder than complex. You have to work hard to get your thinking clean to make it simple, but it's worth it in the end, because once you get there you can move the mountain. So basically you can think, oh, ye to obvious hai, this is this thing, but when you say like this is simple, ye to obvious hai, to get to that stage, like ye to obvious, this is very obvious, you have to really make like lot of efforts actually. You cannot really just say like, okay, I have like some idea and then suddenly it will work. You have to really go back to it like maybe 100 to 1,000 times to make it obvious actually. Okay, so that's the quote from Steve Jobs. So simplicity is not the absence of clutter, that's the consequence of simplicity actually. So basically when we say like what is simple, we don't have to, there should not be absence, it's not the absence of clutter, right? So basically there should not be any clutter and things, but it's a consequence of simplicity actually. So if you think like, if you say like, oh, I want like design as simple as possible, but then it won't happen in 1 day or 2 day. You have idea, and then it's not like on 8th day or 10th day or 15th day you go and file a patent actually. It doesn't work that way actually. Means the stories are good to hear, but when it comes to the nuts and the bolts, it takes like a lot of hard work. And if you are a mechanical engineer, you will understand what I mean by that actually. Okay, so basically this is the schematic of design process. This is everywhere in most of the standard books on design. You will find like these kind of diagrams actually. So basically it is recognizing the need, defining the problem, planning the project, gathering the information, generating concepts, generating alternate concepts, evaluate the alternatives, and then select the most promising concept, Okay, and then build the prototype, test and evaluate. But see, if you look at this, actually this is loop actually. So this is, iterative process, and there are, many arrows like going from one place to another place. So it's very kind of like at the same time it's kind of random as well, because there are so many interactive pieces, or so many pieces of the puzzle that has to come together actually, if you really have a product that is sellable or that people will like and enjoy and want to use actually. Okay, so basically it takes like back and forth, back and forth, back and forth kind of thing to really get to the point where you want to be. Okay, so that's the whole idea. So basically I will talk about like just big picture points on these, means on each of these actually, recognizing the need, and basically what do we mean by gathering the concept and stuff. Again, like I will give like either Steve Jobs or Jonathan Ives quotes actually, what is their idea, and that will help us to really look at this design and innovation from slightly different perspectives actually, not from the theoretical perspective but from the practical point of view actually. Okay, so basically some needs are obvious. Need for suppose a cooler during summer time, so basically I'm sitting in AC or a fan. Okay, so that need is obvious actually, nobody has to really invent that somebody will need a cooler in summer, or a need of a particular food or cloth during the festival time. Okay, so these needs are obvious. Some needs are not so obvious. I will come back to that, what I mean by that. And 80% of the products fail due to misjudging the need, or accurately or not accurately capturing the need actually. Okay, I will give you like one classic example of that as well. And some inventors are genius. They launch a product and customers buy in actually. So when Steve Jobs kind of like launch an iPod, actually he did not really go and ask like, did the market survey like it is needed. He thought, I want to build an iPod for myself. If somebody wants to buy it, they can buy it. Or he knew like this product will be a hit actually. Okay, so basically some needs are just serendipity. I will talk about that as well. Means some needs are kind of like accidental. Sometimes you do not know, or there is something that is going on in somebody's mind, but the technology is not there, and suddenly you will find like, okay, then one day there is some technology developed for some other thing that I can use. So as a product designer or as an innovator, you need to be always, like you need to have like antennas to your head actually. That I tell my students as well. It's not like means these things will come to you like naturally. You need to be on constant lookout. And this day and age of like IT and stuff, there is so much of information. There is a good chance that means it's up to you whether you will catch the right information, or you miss out the right information, because there is too much of it actually, right? So basically you are just bombarded with information like every day. When you get up, there are maybe 100 WhatsApp messages that are forwarded to you and stuff. So basically, and then out of that, one may be of actual interest to, and 99 maybe can be trash. But there is a chance that you will miss that one, because 99 is trash. So you have to be extra careful in this day and age actually. Okay, so now basically, what I'm going to tell you is, so basically one thing that some needs are not so obvious. So basically nobody really kind of like thought. So this is the classic example of that. So basically we have that Walkman. I think many of you might have used the Walkman. Maybe this generation, my kids will never use a Walkman actually, unfortunately. But at least I have used it for a long time, 2-3 years at least. So basically. Walkman, when Walkman came, actually we thought, okay, that's it actually. I mean, there cannot be anything better than that actually, because you can go anywhere, just have the headset and the small tiny device in your hand, or maybe if you have bigger pocket, and then you are kind of done. Okay, so we thought like, okay, then that's the end of the product cycle, and we will not have anything better than that. Then this genius called as Steve Jobs, he kind of like they have this device actually, iPod. He built the iPod, and then means initially people thought like, okay, whether it will work or not. But within like maybe 5 years and stuff, Walkmans were outdated actually. Means Walkman companies had to shut down their plants and these things, because iPod came into market. Then when iPod came, actually this is tiny nano sized device actually. Initially the one big iPod came, and then there was a iPod nano and stuff. Then we thought like, okay, that's it. It can't get like any better than that actually. The only requirement for this iPod and all those things, you need to really fill the songs and stuff. So basically, again, the genius or the innovator in the Steve Jobs and Jonathan Ive, basically what they did was, okay, they said like, okay, we can have like a device that is internet phone actually, iPhone, wherein you can really you don't need anybody. You can just talk to internet and get all the information that you need. If you want to really listen to the music, you don't even need iPod anymore. You just need an internet connection and you can listen to any song that you want. But at the same time, means basically these ideas were there for a long time actually. Means Steve Jobs were trying to do launch like this kind of maybe this kind of product like maybe since like 10-15 years actually. But associated technologies was not there. So imagine your iPhone without high-speed internet, without your 4G. Suppose say you have 1G connection and you have iPhone. It is useless. Nobody will use it. They will say I can get a phone wherein I can just talk to the people actually. If 1G, iPhone will not work. When you have 4G, then only iPhone will work because then you will be able to connect to the world via internet. Right. So that is the thing. So basically, sometimes you may have the ideas actually, but those to get that the final thing or these ideas to get the help from the technology is also one of the challenge. And sometimes you have to be lucky actually that this technology and your idea is in sync actually. If your one of them is forward or backward, then also you will not have like really good product. So both those things should go like hand in hand. Okay, so that's the bottom line. So again, like there is a good story about Gillette as well. So basically there was a guy called Gillette in United States. So basically it's the name of the person, Mr. Gillette. So basically he once thought like the shaving is too complicated actually. He said like you have to go to the barber and then he will means initially if you look at the British era and stuff, only rich people will have their shaved faces and stuff. So most of the old pictures you see like maybe your grandfather or say great grandfather and stuff, they will always have some kind of like beard and stuff, right? Why is that? Because shaving was extremely difficult thing actually. So basically there was a guy called as the Gillette actually. He thought like I want to develop a device that is kind of like tiny enough so that you can put it in on your wash basin and will be able to shave for yourself actually. But for that what he wanted a material that will not rust when it is exposed to say air or water, okay, particularly water, right? So basically what his idea was the same blade you should be able to use it like maybe 10 times, 15 times, 100 times and so on, right? The same blade. So basically what happened was this non-rusting blades were not available. We kind of like invented the steel. We kind of like moved from like cast iron to steel and invented the steel actually, but we did not really have anything that is non-rustable. And then suddenly, out of a serendipity, so there was one British engineer actually. He was working in for the British Army, and their goal was they wanted to increase the range of their missiles or say bullet long of their barrels actually, so that they can shoot the enemy from the longer distance. So basically he was trying out like new material. So basically day job was from 8 to 5 used to come, and then his day job was mainly to test like different materials, so mix like different things and then test it and see whether it increases these ballistic range actually we call it. So basically he kind of like was doing that actually, and then most of the materials he found like they're in the same ballpark, there is no significant increase and stuff. And then typically what happened was 6 months kind of like passed by actually, and he was so meticulous. I'm forgetting the name of the engineer as well, it's there in the internet as well. So basically he was so meticulous. What he will do is he will write down the name of the base material and whatever he has mixed in that thing. So basically he will make that specimen or a prototype, and then he will meticulously write down everything. And then at that time particularly, I'm talking about this discovery like say 30-35 years ago, internet computers were not there, so he will write everything down with his hand and pen, and then he will wrap it around the object or a specimen, right? And so basically 6 months like passed by like that actually, and suddenly one day, and he will put it in his junkyard actually, and suddenly one day what happened was he went to the junkyard actually, and whatever stuff that he had thrown into the junkyard kind of like rusted. There was the only one thing that was not rusted actually, and then that was, so basically he looked at that. So basically what he did was he took the steel and put like a thin chromium layer on top of that actually. So basically then there was the steel was not rusted. So basically this is how the stainless steel was discovered actually. So this thin chromium layer kind of like protects the steel from rusting and stuff. So then kind of like Gillette kind of knew like there was some discovery like that actually. The people have invented stainless steel, and again at that time there was no internet, no communication. Somehow like he came to know that such a material is available right now with some people. So immediately contacted, I don't know what happened in between actually, so he immediately contacted the inventor of the stainless steel actually, and then kind of like said like, okay, can that material be made into the wires? Is this material like ductile enough? Can I really, you know, make it into the shape of the blades and stuff. And this is how he kind of like designed or the first home use non-rusting blades actually, okay, or even normal blades. And in this now we get like in this form actually. But the Gillette blade, the story of even normal blades that we use in the barber shop and stuff, right? The story is the same actually. This is how he devised that blade which is non-rusting, because see, rusting was a big issue at that time. Because why, if suppose say the blade has rusted and you are shaving, then you know you can get like those diseases actually that comes from the rusting and stuff. And then there is a chance of potential death as well. So unless and until this non-rusting technology was demonstrated, he cannot do anything. But he was on the constant lookout, and he was able to develop this Gillette blade. Okay, so that is again the part of the innovation. Look at the simple ideas. You don't need like, you know, some complex thing, but only thing is you need the head and the head and the eyes and the ears that are constantly focused on that particular idea. That's the message that I want to give. Now let's look at, you know, some of the things. So basically we think like, you know, innovation is just give me, let me get like some water. Basically we think that, you know, the people who are successful, they are successful from the beginning actually. It's not the case. Means, you know, whatever you see is the very see, if they are trying like 10 ideas, only one or two will work, the rest 8 will fail. That is the law of the nature actually, you know. Means it's not like you are trying something and you should get the success. So basically the idea is, if you're really interested in product design or, you know, design in general, you must be ready to fail like many times. You know, like how the electric bulb was invented. That story is very famous. Everybody knows that, right? Means he has to do like 1,000 times to say like, okay, these 999 times do not work to have a bulb. Actually, it's just a filament, right? So basically, so if you are really interested in the product and these kind of things, you need to be extremely patient and passionate, and, you know, should have the ability to absorb those failures actually. Okay, so that's that. So basically, now let's look at these examples actually. So basically, everybody knows this Tata Nano actually. So basically, Tata kind of like launched this saying like it is 1 lakh rupees car and stuff, and it had got like a lot of marketing fanfare, everything, you know. But before that, actually, you know, Tata kind of like Ratan Tata kind of like his company developed the Tata Ace actually. So the story about the Tata Ace is also very interesting. So Tata was traveling in roads of the Pune actually, and then he saw like a lot of rickshawalas, you know, they are carrying like a lot of stuff in their rickshaws, and a lot of things are protruding out of these things. So he asked his car driver actually what's going on, means why people do not really carry this in a good fashion, or in a vehicle that will have like you know, some back space where they can open space where they can keep their stuff actually. So the driver was also kind of like maybe interested in these kind of things. So he said like I don't know, I don't think there is any vehicle that can do this job actually. And then that immediately, you know, kind of like the type of person he is, he immediately went to the office and called the people, his colleagues actually, and tell them, okay, I'm seeing this on these roads on my way to the company like every day, and do you really know, like we do not have like any product like that? And then his marketing people like went back, did the research and stuff, and then came back and said really not actually. Maybe in US and stuff, these kind of US UK, these kind of products are available, but in India, indigenous product is not available. Then Tata said like, why don't we really build this actually? So it's like so basically then what happened was this became like extreme success actually. So all the people who were, all the carriers actually, good carriers, they liked this product. It was cheap, and it used to do their job and stuff, and it was really a market hit actually. Okay, so basically that's that. But then, you know, I mean, then the Tata thought like, okay, if this is the hit actually, I want to develop something for say lower middle class people or poor people, or not poor, lower middle class people, so that they can also afford the dream of car actually. So basically he developed this prestigious Tata Nano within 1 lakh rupees at the initial cost. One of my good friends have worked on this project for a long time, so I know like most of the inside stories on that. So basically, you know, what happened was, so basically they kind of like optimized like everything, and then try to put it together in 1 lakhs, and particularly this was their CEO's dream project actually. But somehow what happened was, it did not really work in the market. Why? There are a couple of things actually. So basically, if you look at, you know, so this Tata S is very famous product, you know, and then Tata Nano kind of like failed like miserably. There are a couple of things. So initially what happened was, these Tata Nano engines or whatever, some batteries and stuff like caught fire actually. Okay, so that was the bad publicity and this thing. Another thing is, you know, we typically buy a car as a luxury item. So basically, if your neighbor has a car that is worth like say 5 lakhs rupees, you don't want to buy a 1 lakh car so that you will feel like you will not feel like too good about itself. So basically, we think of car as a comfort item or luxury item. So typically, our lower middle class or upper middle class mentality is we want to maintain our status. So basically, if you are buying a 1 lakh car, then you are kind of like going down in a status actually, because you are kind of like showing it to your friends and this thing that you are kind of like you are not up to the mark with respect to status with respect to them actually, on status with respect to them. So that is one thing that happened actually. And the another thing is typically in Indian families actually, you want to have like slightly bigger cars, so entire family, your parents or in-laws or a couple of kids, everybody should be able to sit comfortably and go and stuff. So basically this is kind of like tiny car for a family and stuff. So maybe this idea, this nano idea would have worked like well in United States actually, because nuclear family, they don't really worry about who has what and stuff. Most of them, not everybody, but in general, their culture is like that. So basically, that's why this so basically the ideas from the same man, but how the ideas can fail actually. Okay, so we think like, okay, if he's able to do one thing right, then he will be able to do next thing right, or this thing, or he has done everything right in his life. It's not like that. So basically the same person, one product can be very much hit, another product can like fail like miserably and stuff like that. Okay, the same story with the Newton actually. So basically when the Jonathan Ive and the Steve Jobs like launched this Newton around 1993 actually, and it failed miserably. So the job was Newton. The idea of the Newton was like your this thing. iPad actually, right? So basically this current iPad. So, but it failed miserably. Why? Because people thought like it is lousy. It is not really, means it's not really fast enough and all that thing. And then their associated technologies were also not there in '93. There was no 4G, no internet, anything like that. So basically, what you will do, you will just try to read the books, or try to write something and highlight and this thing. So the experience was lousy. So people were not ready to really move from hard copied books to this kind of like electronic format. And then you look at around like 2000s or early to late 2000s actually, you see like this iPad came actually in much. So it's the same idea taken from the Newton, but now the product is very different actually. You have like all the features, and then there is artistic this thing. It's so basically you fall in love with this kind of like product, and there are so many applications and stuff. So basically why that has happened? So basically Steve Jobs and Jonathan Ive have learned significantly from their failures in the Newton actually, what user actually wanted. So they are unable to capture the need and those kind of things. So basically you learn from this. So basically you may design like one product that can fail miserably, but if you take like your own lessons and own readings, you can develop the better product in future, provided the customer feedback has rightly taken into account, and at the same time associate technologies have come into picture. So why iPad is so famous? This internet is there. You can really hook it to the internet, and maybe try to read book online or watch video, share your status. You can do like so many things. Okay, so that's the idea. Now even iPad has been taken back seat, because you have like iPhones and all those things. So basically we are getting like smaller and smaller in terms of our reading habits as well, right? So those kind of things. Okay, so that's that. So now how we are doing on time? Okay, so basically, okay, half an hour, so that's fine. I still have some time. So basically, so when you generate the concepts, when you are trying to develop a product actually, when you first start off again, from the Steve Jobs, when you first start off trying to solve a problem, the first solution you come up with are very complex, and most people stop there actually. Okay, so basically you say like, okay, this is the idea what I have, this is my design, and if somebody says no, it will not work, then many people will say, okay, that's fine, then maybe I do not have like a good idea, or I do not have like a good idea that can be converted into product. Okay, so most people stop there. But if you keep going, what Steve Jobs says, if you keep going and live with the problem, and peel like more layers of the onion off, you can oftentimes arrive at some very elegant and simple solutions actually. Most people just don't have the time, put in the time or energy to get there. We believe that customers are smart and want the objects which are well thought through actually. Okay, so basically the thing should be obvious actually. If you really have to think like what is the function, kya karna hai, what needs to be done and stuff, then you are not really developing a good product. It should be obvious. So basically I will give you an example. The steering wheel of a car, it is in the form of a circle or this thing. So if imagine if you have like say rectangular steering wheel, Will you be comfortable? No, not at all, right? So basically, but when you look at the steering wheel of the car, even like say toddler, when he sits in the car or this thing, automatically, when his hands go to the this thing, it will start like he or she will start moving it. Because why? Because the function is so obvious. This is designed to move. This is designed to rotate. So your idea should be that clean and clear actually and crisp. Okay. So now Steve Jobs says actually, I'm actually as proud of the things we haven't done as the things I have done. Innovation is saying no to thousand things. So basically, I want you to take away this message actually. Even if you can just take away this message, I think this lecture will be, it's worth giving the lecture actually. Okay. So it's not like, you just have something and this thing. So innovation is saying no to thousand things. You can get the same thing done through many different ways. But the way, if you really want to have a product, likable product or saleable product, you need to say like, you need to come up with the thing, not a thing actually. You need to come up with the thing that will eventually be liked by everyone actually. Okay. And that is not easy. I'm not saying. So you may not be able to do it in the first go. Maybe you will be able to do it in say fifth go or say sixth go or 10th go. Who knows, So true simplicity is, well, you just keep on going and going until you get to the point where you go, yeah, well, of course, means it's obvious, what's there, where there is no other rational alternative. I gave the steering wheel example, right? So you cannot really think of like steering wheel in any other form actually. Means if you can think of like any other form, maybe we can discuss, but at least I cannot think like steering wheel in any other form. So it's obvious, right? Or means if you look at like any product, means sometimes you look at, suppose for example, you look at the mobile phone, and if the mobile phone is say circular, then you will not be able to read it. Nobody will use it actually. So obviously it has to be have like say rectangular shape. Even square will not be maybe ergonomical good, maybe. Okay. So that's that. So basically this is a little bit on innovation actually. It took like long time, half an hour, not bad. So basically all these material are taken from the internet only. So that's that. So now that was the first part. Now let's get into a little bit the part that I have done actually. So basically again, like this work I'm doing since last almost 10 years actually, you can say. Okay. So basically what happened was this blast into. So any questions so far on this particular part? If there are any questions, I can take it, and then we can go forward.
So we have one question in the Q&A section, and I'll just read it out for you. So Dr. Pramod Kumar is asking that a product success depends on timing, society, needs, and mindset, and competitiveness in the market. Sometimes an item get success in one market and fail in another market, right?
Right. Obviously.
Right. So this is what he's just maybe saying.
Yeah, that's a good point, doctor. Yeah, means that is what I'm trying to hone in. Means I don't really have the idea like about the background of each of person. So some of those things are obvious to you. Means my apologies for that actually. But I thought like some of the stories are interesting that people will benefit actually. Yeah, you are absolutely right. Means I cannot agree with you more on that. Means it's all about Means sometimes I say typically I say like you have to be lucky. That is my one word explanation of your statement actually. Yeah. So now basically, yeah.
That's it, sir. You can continue.
Yeah. So now basically, what happened was, so basically brain is most complex organ in human body. So it is the world's most complex machine. Brain is what differentiates us, the humans, from bees, rats, pigs, and chimpanzees actually. Okay. So basically what I was working on, so let's see, trying to get to the next slide. Maybe there is some lag. Okay. So basically it contains like neurons and stuff. So basically there is a cell and there is this neuronal axon actually. And then if this neuronal axon damages, then you will have like a lot of issues. You might not even be able to remember, or you will have like violent behavior. And there are many other symptoms actually related to brain injuries. And then your life will be miserable actually. You'll not be able to lift and stuff. So basically, this brain injury, if you have the brain injury to the axons, then your brain can get injured, and then then you will compromise on a lot of our day-to-day simple activities actually. Okay, so basically what really happens in traumatic brain injury, actually what happens is that there is a stretching of axons, and then when the axons stress, actually there is a damage of axons actually, and then the communication between different neural circuits actually breaks down, and then you cannot really do your day-to-day functions that are obvious, that like say maybe 2-year-old will be able to do, you will not be able to do that in some cases actually. In some cases you will be able to recover, but on currently so far there is no therapy on traumatic brain injury. There is no medicine to treat it actually, so that is a complex problem. So basically you can get like this traumatic brain injury in an accident, or in contact sports like say boxing or say football, or recently what happened during this Iraq and Afghanistan war actually. These soldiers, they were returning from these wars actually, was kind of like reporting this headaches and the forgetfulness and violent behavior and those kind of things. So basically this because of these conflicts actually, in these conflicts, so basically these soldiers were subjected to these kind of explosions. So basically these explosions were reported at like say 20 to 30 explosions per day in the battlefield, at least 20 to 30 explosions per day. And these typically the soldier will be there like employed for like say 6 months or 1 year period, so they will be subjected to maybe thousands to 10,000s of explosions during their deployment over there actually. And then when they returned actually, they kind of like complained about this traumatic brain injury actually. So what happens is when there is an explosion actually, there is a blast wave that travels. So basically you see like there is an ejecta that is here, but the blast wave actually has reached like far away from that ejecta. So basically you see like something in say like a sand or something in black grayish color, and then there is a fire actually. But by the time even there is a fire, your blast wave has reached like so far actually. So basically it travels at a speed much higher than the sound wave speed actually. Okay, so that is the explosion. And then these soldiers will be subjected to these kind of like the blast waves actually. Okay, so basically when you try to like, if you put it a sensor somewhere here in this particular thing, then you will typically record like something like this. So basically there is a sharp rise in pressure followed by the non-linear decay. So basically it's a air compression actually. It's basically air compression. So basically if I want to tell you in a layman's language, suppose say if there is a tire burst of your tire of your vehicle or say bicycle, there is a short wave, means there is a shock wave that is generated actually. These shock waves are of like very low intensity, but whatever you will see in the battlefield, depending on the how big is the explosion and stuff, the shocks, the waves that are generated can be moderate to severe, and in some cases mild as well. It again depends on the charge mass and how far you are from the charge and those kind of things. Okay, so that's that. So basically these traumatic blast induced head injury has been identified as a signature wound of these conflicts actually. Okay, so that is what has happened. So basically now why this happened actually, if you look at the history of like your Vietnam War or any other war actually, these people will die because of the lung injury. But what we have done in last like say 30 to 40 years actually, or last maybe 25 years for sure, we kind of like developed a body vest that can protect our lungs actually now. So basically your lung is protected, so you will not die in a warfare, because you are wearing a really good body vest. But then the injury will kind of like move to the head actually, because you are not dying, but this blast wave can harm your brain. Okay, so that is the big picture message, and this is clinically confirmed as well. Many people have confirmed clinically that this is because of the blast wave. So basically there are different kind of like mechanisms that are proposed regarding this blast induced traumatic brain injury. One thing is this blast wave can directly transmit through your skull and generate the fields inside your brain, say pressure fields inside the brain, and then that can cause like say swelling or sujation or hematoma in your brain actually. Or another mechanism is this there is a lung thorax compression actually because of the blast wave, and then the blood surge will happen, that will go up and it can damage your brain. So that is another mechanism. The third mechanism is there can be some skull bending, and that can cause the brain damage. And the fourth one is because of the blast wave, your head will like rotate like violently, translate and rotate violently, and it will generate the head acceleration, and that will really cause the head injury actually. And this mechanism is similar to what happens in the car crash or say fall or or the contact force actually. And typically in all of these actually what you will see is the diffuse axonal damage that is not seen on the MRI images for 6 months to years actually. It varies from person to person, but the detection rate is very low in the early stages actually. Unless and until the damage is done, it will not be shown into the MRI. Why? Because these axons are microscopic in nature, and whatever MRI capabilities that you see in your normal hospital or clinic are at millimeter length scale at best. So basically you are trying to visualize something that is 1,000 times smaller. So it will take time. Basically what happens is you need to have like widespread injuries so that to show these things to see the cumulative effect in millimeter length scale actually. So that's the problem. Okay, so and then again I said there is no therapeutics, there is no drug, or there is no vaccine to really treat these actually. So basically what when I was a PhD student at the University of Nebraska Lincoln, where we started was, so basically people were not even knowing whether it is because of the blast wave or if there is something else that happens. So basically we kind of like started our work actually. So we built a shock tube to really generate these blast waves in the laboratory actually, because the explosion nobody have access. If you look at like the entire world, only 1% or less than 1% people have access to explosives, because that is the most significant security, most classified atom. That is the most classified atom, that one can think of actually. So basically, then we kind of like use the shock tube to generate the blast waves that I have just shown, like these kind of waves. Okay, and then wanted to look at what really happens to the head and the brain actually under these influence of these blast waves. We also want to look at like what really happens to the helmets actually. Okay, so basically we did experiments using surrogate heads, so like dummy heads like these, or or say postmortem human subjects as well, and then this is the response of the say surrogate head to the blast wave. So basically whatever you are seeing in the red color is the blast wave has passed by, and then after like a delayed response, so basically there is a head acceleration. So there is a wind actually, blast wind that will come, and then a combined effect of your shock wave and the blast wind really cause the head to rotate actually. Okay, so basically there is a direct transmission indicated by these red lines, and there is the head rotation. So these are the two mechanisms that happen under the blast waves actually. Okay, and those head accelerations, so this is high speed video actually, so those head accelerations as well as these transmitted pressures are quite significant actually, that has a potential to cause the brain damage. So we kind of like measure the acceleration of the head, as well as we put like some sensors inside on the surface as well as inside, and characterize the intracranial pressures in the brain or brain simulant. Okay, so that's that. Now, another thing that we did was we kind of like repeated the same things in the postmortem human subject. So basically this is the dead human that we kind of like got after a lot of efforts actually. So you see like similar effects. So there is this wave propagation effect, and then later like long term. So basically the length scale associated with this is millisecond actually. So the wave transmission happens in a few milliseconds, and then the head rotation takes place in 100 milliseconds actually. So basically 100 milliseconds mean your 1/10 of a second. So head rotation happens in 1/10 of a second, and the transmission happens in 1/100th of a second actually, in 1 millisecond, right? Or not 1 millisecond, maybe 10 millisecond entire event. So basically one is 1/100th of a second, and another is 1/10 of a second. Okay, so the wave transmission is 100th, and head rotation is 1/10 of a second. So these events like happen like really fast. Okay, so what is happening now? Okay, that's great. So now, and then we measured like a bunch of quantities and stuff, and we did the experiments. So experiments are great, but those are time consuming. So just to give you an idea, like these PMHS experiments, so facility itself cost my PhD supervisor like $1 million to build. And such an experiment that I'm just these 4 videos that I showed you, like one video is estimated to cost you like close to like say $1,000 to really get like good data and really get all the putting all the pieces together or the sensors together and stuff. So we kind of like calculated the rough estimated cost, like including all the operational cost, all the personnel cost and stuff. So $1,000. So basically typically like 50,000 rupees for one shot actually. Okay, so that's quite a significant amount actually. So we cannot really build like we cannot really do like many experiments like that actually. So basically what we can do is we can and then get all these data from the experiment. Alternate ways, we can build a computational model, but to validate the computational model as well, we need the experiment, so that we can have like some confidence in our computational model that they are doing what they are supposed to do actually. Okay, so basically this is the human head model that we have developed from MRI images actually. Again, like some of the work is done in the past. I will show you the work that I have done at IIT Roorkee as well. I'm just building the stage for the blast resistance helmet, and these things are important for you to know the complete story, or else you will not understand the full stuff. So basically, this is how we build the models. Actually, it contains the skin, skull, and the brain and everything, and then we build the shock tube as well in the computer, like so in the using the finite elements, and then we kind of like immersed our head neck assembly into the shock tube and looked at like how really blast tube interact with the head and stuff. So this is one animation that is coming from the simulation. Now, if you look at, there is a wave transmission and things, the rotational effects are not captured because we did not run the simulation till 100 milliseconds because the computational cost was high. Now we have capability at IIT Roorkee to run it at 100 milliseconds. When I started, we did not have the capability because we kind of did not knew as well what to do and what are the key parameters that govern these things. Okay, so this is one of the, so basically the wave is transmitting to the brain and things. Okay, so that's that. Now I will skip through this actually. So this is how we build the head model and stuff because from the MRI images. This is self-explanatory. So meanwhile, I will drink the water. So we stack those images together. And then, we differentiated the skull and the skin and the brain. Further, we differentiated the brain as white matter and the gray matter. And then we kind of like generated so-called finite element meshes. So most of you, if you are mechanical engineering background, you may be knowing what is finite element. And then, brain can be was divided into white matter and gray matter. So basically, these are the two different morphologies of the brain. And then we added the helmet as well. Okay. And then we wanted to look at what is the role of helmets actually, because that was also not known, because these helmets are typically designed to stop a bullet actually for the, for the ballistic protection and the blunt impact. Okay. So now basically I will skip through all those details which are not relevant. So we kind of like validated the models against its experiment and stuff, and the match between the experiment and the model is like fairly good. So basically, now I will tell you the interesting part. So basically, I will skip through all those. So now basically what we did in computer, actually, we first did in a computer when I was doing that kind of work. So basically, now look at these two animations or these four animations. So basically the wave is transversing the head, and then, there is the wave focusing actually. So what happens is I will play it like 2-3 times because it is not obvious. I think it will play for itself. So basically, in one case, actually, what happens is just blast wave passes by. In another case, one front moves outside the head and one front like moves between the head helmet subspace actually. And what happens is at certain point in time, these two fronts like meet together on the back. So now the impact is coming from the front. It is clear in this video. So one front is moving like this actually. Another front is moving between the gap between the head and helmet. And when these two fronts meet, the one coming from the outside and one coming from the inside, then there is a blast wave focusing actually. You see that red color. So basically the pressure beneath the helmet will increase. If you look at the same thing without the helmet, the pressure is less actually. So here the color is green, here the red. What does that mean is the pressure with the helmet is much higher than pressure without the helmet. So what does this mean technically, or in the layman's language? Like wearing a helmet is worse than not wearing one under the blast loading condition. So if you have a helmet, then these waves can go and sit. So basically, everybody must have gone to the lake or a sea, right? So there are two waves that come and make a bigger wave or bigger tide, right? So it's kind of like same effect actually. These two waves will come together and make a bigger tide. Okay, so this is what we kind of like saw actually, and then we saw this in the simulation first, and trust me, like nobody believed me actually. Everybody said, including my supervisor said, you are not doing it right. Maybe there is something wrong, because nobody wanted to hear that helmets are worse than not wearing the helmets, because that defies your intuition, because our intuition says helmets are designed to protect. And now I'm saying like, those are worse than even not wearing under the blast loading condition. So the first reaction is there is something wrong with your model, right? Means obviously, means, since I had done it, I kind of like believed it. Nobody else did. And that is the natural human tendency actually, right? So basically, then what we did was I said like, okay, means, I checked everything and, means we made sure like all the simulations are right. We refined the mesh and still the results were same. We did everything. Now, then the time came actually. My supervisor said, why don't we test this actually? Like at that time, the experimental facility was not fully developed. We were still like building the blocks and stuff. So basically, then kind of like 6 months kind of like passed by actually. And this thing was there. We just submitted the paper to a journal. And then meanwhile, we kind of like had the experimental facility. I do not have that experimental video, but then in the experiment as well, we kind of like showed the same thing actually. And I was not actually, when the experiment was done, it was scheduled at some time in the morning, but it didn't happen. So I kind of came back to my office actually, and then somebody else already did the experiment actually. I was not knowing, and so there were lab assistants who did the experiment, and they kind of like observed the same thing when they mounted the sensors at the head helmets of SpaceX. And the guy came running to me and he said like, your computer result seems exactly accurate because we are seeing like much higher pressures beneath the helmet, means when we put the helmet actually. So the takeaway message, so I'm not saying this to really pat my back. The takeaway message is sometimes these kind of computer tools that we have that we have access to these days, they can be extremely insightful. Only thing is you need to make sure your model is accurate, those are set up well, you are doing all the pieces right, everything has been taken care, then these models can be insightful and then you can verify actually. So this predicted from the computer model, verified again, then verified by the experiment and stuff. So that was the thing. And then kind of like we showed like, this focusing translates inside the brain as well, right? So basically this will translate inside the brain. So basically this is, the red is without the helmet, and then the blue is with the helmet. So the pressures with the helmets were higher than without the helmet at certain locations on the back. On the front, definitely helmet provides the protection. On the back, so basically for the front blast, on the back there is a focusing. If the blast is coming from the back, then there will be focusing on the front actually. Okay, so that's that. All right. So basically now then what to do actually, right? So basically, and there are another thing that happens is as I showed it to you, I think in earlier video, experimental video, there is head rotation. So now let's come to a design of like towards the design of blast resistance helmet, and we have like 30 minutes. So that is a good point actually. So now basically you have like this blast wave focusing and violent head rotation that can happen under the explosive induced blast wave. So basically while designing the blast resistance helmet, we were interested to mitigate these two effects actually. One is focusing effect beneath the helmet and another is head rotation actually. So basically how did we go about it? Okay, so this was the motivation. So to develop a helmet for the protection against blast, we wanted to do that, and these are the objectives actually. To design and develop a helmet capable of mitigating blast and induced head injuries, laboratory and field testing of the helmet, and field deployment of the helmet, and biomechanical analysis of the field data actually. So basically right now the technology that is capable of mitigate the blast wave focusing and the rotational motion of the head, the objective is to create technology that can be integrated into existing helmet, because we did not want to start from the scratch actually. We never wanted to reinvent the wheel because current helmets are really good for ballistic protection. So basically we started from there actually. We took the helmet and wanted to develop the accessories so that this focusing and rotational effects can be minimized actually. Okay, so right now the technology is at TRL level 4 actually. So it has been tested in the field by independent research group of researchers. Okay, so basically the novelty is helmet can mitigate the blast wave focusing effects as well as rotational motion of the head. Okay, proof of concept, independent testing, I talked about it. So basically now what goes in really saying like helmet is capable, right? So again, like here, so all this work we have done in IIT Roorkee. So basically first thing that we tried to do is we kind of like developed a facility wherein under the impact load basically, and the blast testing we did at Terminal Ballistic Research Laboratory, Chandigarh. We kind of like developed a capability so that we can measure the full field head deformations, actually, how the head really moves, how the brain really moves within the head when there is an impact or when there is a blast, and then we can quantify these deformations of the brain, actually. So if we say, we want to say like if helmet is doing better or not, first of all, we need to have like the matrices that tells like, that are capable to tell the information within the head. So basically, we spend like 2-3 years really to develop this and really, get our stamp or get our head into this and really demonstrate that we can indeed measure these deformations and the head acceleration and those kind of things. So basically, that's the kind of like side stuff, but this is extremely important while evaluating the helmets, actually. And then again, like we did the concurrent simulations as well to really look at what happens under the blast and impact, and these are some of the pictures. So basically, now we kind of like introduced like two kind of technologies, actually. One is face shield that will not allow these blast wave to enter the head helmet surface, actually, and then protect, and thus protecting the blast wave focusing, actually. And then we introduced another soft pads, actually. So already there are foam pads, but those foam pads we found like are not capable to mitigate the rotation. So basically, we made a pad of a granular material, and that material is kind of secret. That kind of like mitigates the head rotation, actually, by by local sliding. So basically, whenever head will try to rotate, what happens is the material that are there in the pad, they will try to really move relatively with respect to head and the helmet. So there is a local sliding, and then all the energy will be lost into the sliding, actually, and then the head rotation and the corresponding strains in the brain will be decreased like significantly. There will be still some rotation, but what we have demonstrated is the rotations are decreased like in a statistically significant sense, actually. Okay, so that's that. So basically, now with the help of face shield, so we did these experiments at TBRL, actually. So you see this green, red is no helmet, and the blue is padded helmet, and then padded helmet with the face shield, actually. You see, like with the face shield, the blast waves are mitigated to a significant level or almost negligible level, actually. Okay, so that's the first piece. And even with the padded helmet, you do like with the pad, if there is a gap, but with the pad as well, there is a chance that the soldiers need to fight the war and in 40 degrees and 45 degrees. So there will be always the gaps that are created, actually. So the pads will not fit like perfectly onto the head helmet space. And what we demonstrated is whenever there is a gap, there will be a focusing. So when there is a face shield, then that will mitigate the focusing. So that was the one thing. Now these anti-rotational pads, actually, what they will do is, so basically these are the deformations that we have measured in the brain simulant, actually. So you see the top one is no helmet. The middle one is a helmet with the conventional helmet, actually, conventional military helmet, and the third one is military helmet with our pads, actually. So basically, you see like the statistically significant differences into the strain values, actually. So if you look at here it is kind of like plus minus 40%, and here it has reduced like significantly, actually, on the order of like say plus minus maybe 25% and stuff are still there, but means we can. So in fact, surprisingly, if the intensity is further increased, actually, these pads tend to do better, actually. So this was shot that has been taken at say 3 meter per second velocity. If we ramp up the velocity, in fact, the performance of the pad will increase because the sliding will increase, actually, because it takes like certain amount of energy for the entire system to slide, actually, right? So basically, that is what really happens. So we have shown that like these anti-rotational pad can mitigate the strains as well as accelerations on the head, actually. Okay. Now, basically, these are some of the specifications. So we want to have that angular velocity less than 5 radian per second and angular acceleration 4,000 radian per second square. So basically, all the velocities that we have tested so far, 3, 5, 1, we went up to 6, I think. So we went up to 6. So basically, in all that, we were able to see that these accelerations are below these levels, actually. Okay. So that's that. Now looking forward, actually, so that's the short. So basically, we added these accessories actually. Now we are trying to build upon these results actually, and trying to really collaborate with Terminal Ballistic Research Laboratory in Chandigarh, and we have Technology Innovation Hub at IIT Roorkee recently developed. So basically, right now we are at TRL 4. We want to take it further to say TRL 7 or 8, so that this technology can be used by the our soldiers and everyone. Okay, so that's that. So with this, I think I have spoken a lot. So with this, I think I will stop here, and I hope it was not too boring, both the parts. And if you have any question, I will take it actually. Okay, I will just stop the sharing. So what's the time? Okay, so it's not bad. So kind of we have few more minutes. Maybe we have maybe 20 to 25 minutes more. So Rachit.
Yes, sir. If any participant has any question, they can post the questions in the Q&A section.
Okay, no problem.
So we have one. We have one question, sir.
Yeah.
Sir, is this effect is similar on flat plains and mountains or forests? I'm not getting the question, sir.
The effect is what? Similar on flat plains or mountains?
Flat plains and mountains or forests.
We haven't really tested. Means you mean the blast effect, right? The focusing effect, you mean?
I hope so, sir. But it's not written in the question.
So ideally it should be the same actually, but to be very frank, we haven't really tested on the mountains and the forest actually, because there is no way for us to really do the experiments there. But maybe that's a good food for thought for me. We will have to check. But ideally, this blast wave, if the blast is, if you're sufficiently away from the source, then we call it as a free field blast. So it doesn't really matter whether you are on the flat plane or the mountain. The free field blast will travel the same way actually. So if you are like sufficiently away from the blast source, maybe a few meters, like say 2-3 meters, then you will always be subjected to free field blast waves. So the effect will be same. Our ideally or theoretically, the effect should be same in the mountains and this thing. Now, whatever reflections that will come from the terrain and stuff, that we haven't really studied actually. That is totally different this thing. But we can look at it. That's why I said like it is at TRL 4. So that's all the things that we can explore in between stages actually. Or we can try to generate these environments, mountainous environments in the laboratory. I cannot think right now, but maybe as our Steve Jobs has said, you have to keep thinking. So we'll see like how it goes, but it's a good question actually.
Right, sir. Any other questions?
So the main takeaway message I would say is it takes time, means it takes like almost like 7-8 years of work to really, to really develop something even at say TRL level 3 and 4. Because first of all, you have to scientifically show like, this is what is happening. And then you have to show like how you can mitigate and all those things. So it's not like, it's not like, putting something on a Facebook or Twitter or, on WhatsApp and stuff. It takes like much more time and efforts than we think in the product development actually. And means that is a universal truth. Even means with the best resource and stuff, it takes like almost a decade to develop a good product.
Right, sir. So we don't have any other question for now.
Okay.
We will be sharing the email of DIC with the participants, and if the participants have any further questions regarding your talk. Okay, we have one more question, sir.
Yeah.
Okay. No, it's not a question, sir. It's okay.
Okay.
I'll, on behalf of the DIC, I'll be. I'm very thankful for to you for delivering this talk today, and I'm very thankful that you have shared your valuable time and experience with all the participants. And I hope that the participants will have learned a lot from you during this talk.
Okay.
Thank you so
Thank
much,
you.
sir.
Yeah, thank you, Rachit. I appreciate that. Okay, thank you, guys. Take care. Bye. So I'm leaving the meeting, Rachit. Is that fine?
Yes, sir. You may leave the.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
I just want to make one quick announcement for the participants. Today we are having a valedictory session from 4 to 4:30, and because of that, we have preponed the session, the evening session by 30 minutes. That is, the session will start at 2:30 and will end at 4. And after that, we will be having a valedictory session in which we will be sharing the feedback forms also, as well as we'll be also awarding certificates to few participants. So all should be present at around 2:15 p.m. Thank you, everybody.